But first, we're going to go to UFO Insight, where there's a story by Marcus Lowth entitled The Dubno Alien Abduction Case and Ukraine's Long History of UFO Encounters. This is about UFO encounters in Ukraine. And Marcus begins, for obvious reasons, as they stand in April of 2022, Ukraine has been the focus of almost the entire planet for several weeks. With that focus have come several UFO reports from different regions of Ukraine. It says here to start with the Dubno alien abduction encounter. The Dubno, there it is. The 2008 Dubno alien abduction encounter. According to the 20th of June 2008 edition of Facts newspaper, on the evening of the 11th of January, 34-year-old Vladimir Voronezhsky and his 29-year-old wife Olga, as well as their young son Arthur and their two daughters, Vanessa and Angelica, 8 and 9 respectively, were at home when Olga realized she needed some groceries from a nearby shop. She asked her two daughters to go pick these up for her, which they did. However, as they made their way back, they both spotted something strange in the sky overhead. When they arrived back home around 9 p.m., they each excitedly informed their parents they had witnessed a flying star. To begin with, Olga dismissed the girls' claims, offering that they had likely seen a plane or a passing satellite. The girls, however, insisted that what they had seen was not a plane or a satellite, but was a round object with flashing lights of white, yellow, and red. To make their point, each of them sketched a picture of exactly what they had seen. The sketches, incidentally, matched almost completely. Now not certain if a plane or satellite could explain what their daughters had seen, Olga and Vladimir went out to see if they could see anything for themselves. To their amazement, they could each see a strange object that appeared to be hovering over a river in the distance. The more they watched, the more it appeared to be changing shape as it moved around. Olga attempted to capture a picture with her mobile phone, but it showed only a blurred yellow object. Eventually, the family returned to the house, confident that nothing more of interest would unfold. But several hours later, at around 2 a.m., with all of the family asleep in their beds, Vladimir was suddenly awoken by a brilliant white light illuminating his entire room. He turned to wake Olga to inform her what was happening. However, still half asleep, she mumbled he was dreaming and turned over. Convinced he was still in a dreamlike state, Vladimir also went back to sleep. Vladimir was not the only one who had been brought out of sleep with the bright light. Angelica was woken by an intense orange light that shined the small gap in their bedroom blinds. After several moments, she jumped out of bed to tell her parents about the light. This time, when Angelica burst into the room, Olga woke immediately and turned to wake Vladimir. He awoke and was completely perplexed as to what he was seeing. The entire roof appeared to be completely transparent, allowing him to see straight through into the night sky. Even more amazing was the disc-shaped object that was hovering in the sky over the top of their house. Without even dressing, Olga and Vladimir left their bed and ran outside. When they looked up, they both stopped dead. In front of the house, at a distance of around 350 feet, a disc-shaped object hovered. An extremely bright light came from the object. As the pair stood and watched it, Olga suddenly began to rise into the air in a spiraling motion. Vladimir reached out in an attempt to grab her leg, but was unable to do so. Olga continued upwards, feeling as though she was paralyzed, while an intense feeling of sickness overcame her. Then things became even more bizarre. Without knowing what had happened or how they had gotten there, Vladimir and Olga were inside a large room without furniture and with transparent glass-like walls. They looked around the room for several moments until they settled on several humanoid entities that were in the room with them. Each was around 3 feet tall, with gray skin and particularly large heads. They also had 3 fingers on each hand and wore some kind of tight-fitting bodysuit with hoods that covered their heads and masks that covered their heads and masks that covered their faces, leaving only the large black eyes visible. They must have COVID. Even stranger, neither Vladimir or Olga could see legs on the entities, who instead moved around in a similar way as a caterpillar would. As they looked over this strange group of creatures, the pair noticed a taller humanoid, around 5 feet, who wore similar clothing, but whose face was completely covered. The smaller entities moved closer to Olga and took her to a medical-like chair, placing her in it. Vladimir, who was previously rooted to the spot in fear, rushed toward his wife in order to take her from the chair. But before he could reach her, his progress was halted, as if an invisible wall had suddenly been placed in front of him. Moments later, 2 of the smaller humanoid entities approached him and dragged him away. He screamed out as they did so, when suddenly a voice appeared in his head, telling him he would soon be back home. Vladimir knew this was one of the creatures, speaking to him telepathically. He attempted to resist them, causing several more of the entities to come and assist the first 2. A struggle ensued for several moments. All the while, telepathic voices entered his mind, instructing him not to struggle. Eventually, one of the entities placed 4 metal rod-like devices on his chest, and he became immediately paralyzed. With Vladimir now incapacitated, the entities turned their attention back to Olga. She was lying back in the chair, and despite looking around her, she could not see any types of medical equipment at all. However, when she looked back down at her torso, she was horrified to see that the entities had made an incision across her abdomen. The more she looked, the more she realized she could see her internal organs. Despite this, she did not feel any pain or discomfort. In fact, she would later recall feeling a sense of tranquility and relaxation. Although she had no idea of what was taking place, she believed the humanoid entities were taking samples from her organs. She watched as they used various different medical instruments to do so. Instruments she had never seen before. When these experiments were over, they proceeded to sew the incision shut, although they used some kind of advanced technology to do so. So much so that not even a small scar remained, to suggest that anything out of the ordinary had taken place. Even stranger, Olga would later recall that she had suffered from stomach pain throughout her life. However, following the encounter, this pain never reappeared again, as if the entities had corrected something. Vladimir also underwent experiments at the hands of the creatures, although seemingly not as extensive as those of his wife. At one stage, he recalled that an object that appeared similar to a handgun was pressed inside his head, although he felt no pain whatsoever. Even stranger, following these experiments, he was taken by the smaller human entities to a separate room where the taller entity was. This is where a bizarre conversation took place, during which Vladimir asked why he and his wife had been taken. To this, the humanoid replied, "It simply had to be done." With that, Vladimir and Olga were placed in large armchair-like seats in a room facing transparent walls. Through the walls, they could see stars and planets all around them, as if they were somewhere in deep space.